Welcome to the Pell and Neroth Taylor Show on this Friday, the 27th of September. Well, there are big goings on in New York. Trump said he's going to meet Zelensky's finally. The decision on missiles seems to have been not given, or rather the Biden has said no, but the British are still keeping up the ambiguity of whether they will decide or not. And I guess it's to keep the Russians on their toes, although it can't be excluded that there's private permission be given for use of the Storm Shadows. It needs American satellite technology to be guided to their targets, and that, as the Brits said at some earlier point, we'll only know when they hit. And I speculated that while the Brits probably don't want to create daylight between them and the Americans on this issue, they'll be isolated. There might be a faction inside the British intelligence and political community that thinks that if you just drop a bomb and cross very publicly the Russian red lines and to take out an important base or something, the Russians are then going to be forced to adhere to their publicly stated red lines and go to war. There'll then be a state of war between Britain and Russia, and maybe the Russians will also declare war on other countries. And although NATO don't have the capability to do that much, and the Russians don't, and they certainly don't want to, that state of war, which might lead to a rapid rearmament from the NATO side without there being kinetic war, will push the Western countries into that kind of rearmament that commentators in the UK press have said is necessary for taking on Russia. Now that the current situation, that the countries are quite unprepared, whereas Russia is quite remilitarized, is totally unsatisfactory. So I talked about that as a possibility, that they'll do something crazy, and I'm just, I guess, affected by my research on World War One, where the Brits did everything they could to bring the Americans in, and so doing something on their own without the American foreknowledge might drag the Americans in by virtue of the fact that Russia declares war on both sides, or thinks that the Americans were agreed on that decision by the Brits to do it alone. I think not. I touted it yesterday as a possibility that the Brits will drop one of those missiles, but I'll go with the possibility that it's been a psychological ruse on the main from the Brits, with the possibility that if it does go ahead, the Brits will go ahead with what the Americans say, and they've got the backup position where they won't declare that the Brits have been denied the use of the Storm Shadows. They'll just say that no decision was taken and leave the ambiguity there for the Russians to work out. And I think that's been the case. It's interesting that the America-based British correspondents tend to say, no, the Storm Shadows were not given permission, and that Biden is dug his heels in, and, Zelensky's going home with his primary goal unachieved, and the Brits are going home. Whereas the British press, the British correspondents travelling with the Starmer Press pack, are still retaining that kind of ambiguity. So it's probably a kind of agreement between the British correspondents on that British equivalent of Air Force One and Starmer to keep the ambiguity. So the main thing is, it hasn't been headlined. I mean, you'd be expecting too much from the British press to say Zelensky fails in his main goal as America refuses to escalate. It's kind of downstream. It's kind of buried a little bit in the smaller articles somewhere. But I take it as a defeat for the war faction, for the European Parliament, for the 3 or 4 big European leaders who wanted escalation, including the Scandinavians, I think, including the Balts, including, of course, the Brits, and maybe Antony Blinken, and a victory for peace and common sense. That said, no one will ever pay the price for this. I mean, there's no accountability. It's incredible that we could have got as far as we did, where Britain's survival or Britain's state of war or peace is outsourced to the American president, where his senile say-so makes all the difference, rather than there being a debate in Britain about whether this was allowed to happen. I mean, the Brits would have allowed it to happen without any debate, as long as the Americans had said yes. It's a bit like, you pick a potential murder victim, and you tell all your friends, let's go and murder that person. and you don't intend to do so, but you just want to see what their reaction is. And they say, yeah, let's do that. They take out their knives and go up to the person. You say, no, it's not happening. I was only joking. The police are around the corner. Well, you think, what kind of persons are that? The Brits were prepared to start World War III, unless they were kind of working it out in advance that, the Americans are going to say no, so we can afford to push for it and seem macho and everything. But it seems as if the whole British political class were ready to go into World War III if the Americans had just given their say-so. Anyway, I'm very grateful for Biden and the Pentagon for saying no, and let's leave it there for the moment. Meanwhile, so no missiles to Ukraine, or no permission for the British and American missiles to be launched into Russia proper, which will hit out fuel depots and air bases and so on, potentially. Even not that's not clear. According to the Daily Telegraph today, most of those vulnerable depots and air bases that the Russians are using to strike Ukraine with are now been moved out of the Storm Shadow and ATACMS range. So even if they were given permission to fire those, the Brits were given permission to fire them, and with American satellite coordination, it wouldn't have made a military difference anyway, which makes it even more obvious that the main purpose of all this, it was a political stunt to create a state of war, now that the Russians have turned that into a red line issue. So let's leave the missiles for a moment. We've got Trump saying he'll go meet Zelensky today, Friday, even perhaps as we speak, probably in Trump Tower. He said at a press conference delivered in front of a sea of flags in Trump Tower. He said he's going to meet Vladimir Zelensky on Friday morning, and then slammed Europe for being miserly when it came to Ukraine. Europe is paying only a small fraction of the money the United States of America is paying, and we have an ocean between ourselves and Russia. They don't. The United States is paying for most of it, and Europe is not chipping in. It's very unfair to the United States. Particularly, let's say, the Brits have a minuscule contribution compared to the American ones, but they still want to call the shots. The British don't have a military to speak of. We'll get to that in a moment. Trump has talked openly about the need for peace, and it's worth reiterating what he said. He said that on this press conference yesterday, Russian President Vladimir Putin would not have started the full-scale war invasion of Ukraine if Trump had still been in the White House. He knows Putin very well, and insisted that, I believe I'll be able to make a deal between President Putin and President Zelensky quite quickly. Asked if this would involve Ukraine ceding land to Russia, Trump replied, we'll see what happens. Let's get peace. We need peace. And interestingly, he'd said at a campaign event earlier, the day before yesterday, that Ukraine should have given up a little bit to appease Moscow and avoid a bloody conflicts with its invading neighbor. So, and he also said, when Harris criticized him for being surrendering to the pesky Russians, that he just wanted to stop the horror show that's gone on. And we need to stop the death and destruction. We just need peace. Earlier, of course, J.D. Vance, as vice presidential candidate, has said that Russia could retain the land it's seized and establish a demilitarized zone with a heavily fortified front line to prevent another Russian invasion. Well, I mean, it shows you that Trump is a realist, to my mind, and I really believe him when he's saying that. And of course, he's going to speak Zelensky. Zelensky, who's kind of been insulting both J.D. Vance and Trump in an interview with the New Yorker, talked a little bit about that yesterday. So now apparently they're meeting today. Apparently after first not having fixed a meeting, they've relented. Starmer, meanwhile, has also been meeting Trump. They dined for 2 hours last night at Trump Tower. This after, a whole package of insults down the years when Starmer was in opposition. The two men, according to a readout, they discussed the long-standing friendship between the United Kingdom and the United States and the importance of continuing to develop the strong and enduring partnership. UK Foreign Secretary also attended that meeting, and once he called Trump a woman-hating, neo-Nazi, sympathising sociopath. Whereas just this week, British Security Minister Angela Eagles said that the Republican had emboldened racist rioters in Britain with his anti-immigration rhetoric. Even Starmer's criticised Trump in the past, saying that in 2019 that an endorsement from Donald Trump of Boris Johnson tells you everything what you need to know and what is wrong with Boris Johnson's politics and why he isn't fit to be Prime Minister. So a lot of bashing there of the Republican presidential candidate, and Labour, of course, are, well, pragmatic perhaps. I mean, in politics there are no friends, just interests, and I guess you have to sit down with your adversaries. So we'll see what that. I don't know. Presumably, Starmer is carrying water for the entire European political class and saying that Trump mustn't make that peace deal, which is said to be Putinist in origin or at least inspiration. But we'll see how far it goes with that. I mean, Trump, I think, is a very, very strong, genuine belief. I sometimes wondered whether he had a Czech wife, Ivana, and his children have that sort of East-West dichotomy in their personalities. And I always thought that the Czechs, being Slavs, and perhaps the Slavic nation most sympathetic to Russia, there's a kind of sentimental, sympathetic understanding of the East European Slavic psychology that makes, perhaps more than any other president, Donald Sr. sympathetic to the Russians on a visceral level. And that goes for Don Jr. I think has been very public in sort of talking about the need for peace. It's a divorced child also thinking, child of a divorced couple also wanting to bring people together, and bringing Russia and America together is a sort of, like the wish of a parent, of a child of divorced parents somehow. There's some deep psychological thing there, I think. I do believe that. Anyway, we've got Biden not having okayed the Storm Shadows, or let alone ATACMS, which is the American, even longer range version of the Storm Shadows, did stuff Zelensky with $8 billion worth of aid, and a promise from Harris that Zelensky's fight matters to the people of America. That seems to be the sum of her contribution to it at the moment. And the new aid package announced by Biden includes the first US deliveries to Kiev of a precision-guided glide bomb called the Joint Standoff Weapon, which has only got a range of 70 miles. Even if we were to be authorized to strike into Russia, it's nowhere near as dangerous as the Storm Shadows or the ATACMS. And anyway, we just heard also that the Russians have moved those their military installations beyond the 300-mile range. So it's probably a moot point. And my guess is that the Joint Standoff Weapons, the JSOWs, won't be given authorization to strike into Russia itself. Interestingly, they'll be attached to the F-16 planes. And Zelensky, of course, he wanted those long-range strikes, mostly for their political purpose, as I said, because to bring NATO into the war is his big, often not so unsubtly talked about dream, I think. But he, of course, had to thank the Americans for what he did get. And that's that. We've got Harris, of course, has stayed away. I don't think Starmer met her either. She described Trump's campaign policy on ending Russia's war as proposals of surrender. These proposals are the same as those of Putin, and let's be clear, they're not proposals of peace. Instead, they're proposals for surrender, which are dangerous and unacceptable. It's interesting. The whole flock of neocons have gone over to Harris. Formally, they'll go to wherever the war spirit resides. And I guess Harris is undoubtedly the best hope for the war hawks if she were to win. But it remains to be seen whether her policy will be any more or less aggressive than Biden. I mean, she has less of an emotional commitment, to be sure, but to give Biden his due, he hasn't escalated to World War III. He's much, much more knowledgeable. On the other hand, Kamala has reputed the authoritarian tendencies, and if she doesn't know much about Ukraine and its troubled history, its previous non-existence, its divided nature between the pro-Russians in the East and the very strongly nationalist ex-Nazi pro-Ukrainians in the West, she might take the binary black and white view of her neocon advisors. And women are sometimes more dangerous than men. We know Madeleine Albright thought that 500,000 dead Iraqi children was a price to pay to defeat Saddam. So I do fear a little bit for Kamala Harris presidency. I mean, I thought that when we missed Hillary Clinton presidency, I think Hillary's in another division of when it comes to evil compared to Harris, but I do worry a little bit about a Harris presidency. Probably might a little bit more than the Biden presidency, actually. So let's just hope that Trump wins, and I do have good hopes for Trump. Anyway, as part of his swan song, Biden is assembling a group, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, with all his allies in Germany next month, and we'll see what results of that. Well, on that point of where the weapons that the West are supposed to, some articles have recently mentioned how the Europeans have certainly stepped up to the plate on this after the Russian invasion, but I think not. I mean, I'd like to draw attention to one article by the Kiel Institute of Economy, which is one of Germany's premier think tanks, talking about how the German armed forces, or Bundeswehr, are still far below its capacity benchmark from 2 decades ago, despite the Zeitenwende, or turning, that Scholz announced after the Russian invasion. The number of battle tanks has fallen from 2,400 during the late Cold War to just 339, and there are only 12 air defense systems. Of course, all Western countries have emptied out their stocks. So even though the $100 billion were touted, were earmarked for this modernization, that fund is due to run out by 2028, when Germany expects to meet NATO's recommended of spending just 2% of GDP on defense. Moritz, the German president of the Kiel Institute, which compiled this report on the Bundeswehr under preparations, his name is Moritz Schullerich. He said that the military spending promised by the German government in 2022 has so far proved just to be empty rhetoric. Meanwhile, what's going on in Britain with their big mouths? Well, according to Mark Nichol in the Daily Mail, for instance, and picked up by Peter Hitchens, a sort of the licensed opposition in a way to the British war-making class. He writes that the country Britain cannot defend itself from a country much bigger than Legoland. The utterly dire state of the Royal Navy fleet can be revealed today, writes Mark Nichol, their defence correspondent, with not one of the UK's 6 attack submarines at sea. Only 9 out of 25 warships and attack submarines are active or deployed, while the rest of the fleet, to quote the Daily Mail directly, the rest of the fleet is broken down, as being modified or undergoing trials, while the HMS Bulwark and destroyer HMS Daring have been inactive for 7 years. Right, that's that. We're going to go take a break, and then we're going to talk about the latest Homeland Security report into the first Trump assassination attempt and rumors of an Iranian plot against Trump, which may or may not be cover for the domestic enemies preparing for a strike against Trump. Third time lucky. After the break. Right, well, back to the assassination attempt. It's obviously questions whether it's related to Trump's peace policy or his just general promise to clean out the deep state. They'll kill you before he gets to kill them, professionally, that is. Well, there's certainly something dodgy about what's going on, let alone the second assassination attempt, which we'll find out more about later, I guess. But the first assassination attempt, the one in July, well, Ron Johnson and the Homeland Security Committee have come out with a report, and Ron Johnson gave a very interesting interview to Jesse Waters at Fox News, where he revealed a couple of things. He said, for instance, a counter-sniper without a view of crooks told the bipartisan investigators of the committee that he heard a bullet fly between him and his partner, which raises him all kinds of questions, because there were 2 counter-sniper teams, and the northerly located sneak team on the roof didn't actually have a view of the building, the AGR building, American Glass building, where Crooks was firing from. So there must have been a second shooter. Well, there's still a lot that we don't know, but what they do know, we don't have to prove. It's like the Building 7 in 9/11. You just have to show that there are anomalies that can't be explained in the original null hypothesis, which means that we reject the null hypothesis and that we need to dig further. That top line, as it were, by Ron Johnson, the senator for Wisconsin, that there was a bullet flying between the two counter snipers at a place where these particular guys didn't have a line of sight against Crooks, so there must have been a second shooter. I know that, and I talked about on my main show, there was lots of guys. John Cullen is a good one, and Chris Martinson, who creating advanced theories about multiple shooters. All that could be true, but let's just leave this for them. Leave what these guys are speculating and go with a kind of semi-official line. And that because that's where the debate is at the moment, and just that Ron Johnson, a very senior senator's voiced that thought, that piece of evidence, which is all officially channeled through a congressional committee, tells us that the official story is not true of a sort of lone killer. Right, so just to spell out what Ron Johnson was saying, we had one sniper that we interviewed. He was on the team that had an obstructive view. They couldn't see Crooks. There was a tree in front of him. Both those snipers apparently believe a bullet went between them. You can hear the whiz crack from the bullet, so that opens up all kinds of questions. They couldn't see Crooks. Crooks couldn't see them, and yet a bullet flew between this Hercules 2 sniper team. Anyway, what else did Johnson have to say? Well, the Secret Service's meetings with locals ahead of time were so disorganized and that officials were left more confused than ever. They had a walkthrough before the rally, but it was a mess. There's no plan. Locals, that is the local law enforcement who collaborated with the Secret Service, told site agents that more work would be needed to be done to secure the site. But the Secret Service was like, hey, don't worry about it, we'll take care of things. But they didn't. They didn't sweep the AGR building, where the Crooks was on the roof of that. They didn't see the AGR building's roof, and they didn't put anyone in charge from the Secret Service or law enforcement, because the Secret Service are in charge of everything, to surveil the AGR building. They just left it. And they also denied the Biden-Harris administration, according to the Homeland Security Committee, they denied the Secret Service's request for additional resources to Butler. For instance, they had problems with a drone network. They needed lots of help. I mean, this is just one example. The agent overseeing the counter-drone efforts spent hours on the phone with a toll-free tech support line. That's incredible. And we know that Crooks was flying a drone around the area at an earlier stage. Well, under the sort of counter-drone efforts by the Secret Service, which are kind of standard, that never would have happened. But this guy was on tech support saying, well, how can I get my counter-drone into the air? Secret Service had half an hour's notice after being alerted about a suspicious individual with a rangefinder. Apparently, you use a rangefinder when you're trying to shoot somebody or something, or whether you're going to play golf. Crooks certainly wasn't going to be playing golf at that Butler rally. But no one ever stopped Trump from taking the stage. They also had a 2-minute warning that Crooks was on the roof, with a gun. Nothing happened. He was not pulled from the stage. He could have been pulled from the stage at any earlier moment while they were working out what Crooks was doing, this suspicious guy, and they didn't do that at any point. At one point, the Secret Service saw locals running towards the AGR building with their guns drawn, and they still didn't take him off the stage. Nobody was told there were threats against the former president that day. This is incredible. Ron Johnson was saying it was local that law enforcement took the first shots at Crooks. So if they did that, why weren't they Secret Service? Because there's 2 Secret Service counter-sniper teams. There was a northern team. They didn't have line of sight against Crooks, but there's a southern team, and they also didn't fire. It was required for a law enforcement officer standing in a completely different place, I think several hundred yards away, to take that kill shot. But they don't know. They can't know for sure which shot took out Crooks, because his body was cremated. And what's more, Ron Johnson and his fellow committee members were not allowed to see the autopsy report. they'll have to subpoena it like the House did. And they haven't seen the toxicology report. They don't have any crime scene photos. They haven't received one single of FBI's transcripts from over 1,000 interviews. We've been given 12 people to interview, and quite honestly, the only reason we've got some pretty decent interviews is my staff talking to local law enforcement the week after the assassination attempt got the names of Secret Services agents on the ground, or else we'd be floundering, and the Secret Service wouldn't be providing us people that provide us any kind of information whatsoever. So basically, they talked to the local law enforcement, who were kind of the honest guys in this, and from them got the name of Secret Service agents whom they contacted directly, because Ron Johnson and his committee didn't get anything from the Secret Service or the FBI themselves. What more doesn't Ron Johnson and his committee know? We don't know the encrypted accounts of social media. And yet the FBI releases the manifesto from the other assassination. And Ron Johnson doesn't have the CIA or the FBI or the CBP files on crooks. So the federal law enforcement are completely opaque. So thanks only to the local law enforcement officers who gave them what little they do know. Why are the feds slow walking?